Humble soul child, got a fist balled. I'm a respawn of ancestors, and I'm blessed. You're not him, tell him fess up.
Welcome back to On The Cage MMA. My name is Brandon Eldridge, and today we're going to be running through my top 10 American UFC fighters.
Number 10 is Nick Diaz. Nick Diaz is one of the most well-known names in MMA. It's not surprising considering he's fought in 8 different fighting companies and has been champions in 3 of them. He's had an MMA record of 26 wins, 10 losses and 2 no contests. He is a 3rd degree black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu under Cesar Gracie and is also the older brother of former UFC fighter Nate Diaz. He may not have been an undefeated champion in the UFC, however, he is a massive fan favourite and he's had a huge impact in the world of MMA, fighting with guys such as Robbie Lawler, BJ Penn, Anderson Silva, Carlos Condit, and being one of the only fighters to ever call out George St. Pierre, who is considered one of the GOATs of MMA. This mouthy yet relatable fan favourite fighter from Stockton has earned himself a spot on my top 10 list. My number 9 is Ronda Rousey. Rousey's MMA record has a total of 12 wins and 2 losses. Her only 2 losses being to Holly Holm and the GOAT of all female fighters, Amanda Nunes. She defended her UFC belt in 6 fights before suffering her loss back in 2015. She has a total of 9 Olympic medals in judo, 4 being gold, with 2 silver and 3 bronze medals. She fought out the Glendale Fighting Club in Santa Monica, California. Some of you may even know her partner, former UFC fighter Travis Brown. Even though Rousey is now with the WWE, she was the first ever woman to headline a show for the UFC and was voted ESPN Best Female Athlete of all time back in 2015. For everything that she's achieved whilst being in the UFC, I've placed her at number 9 in my top 10 list. At number 8, I chose Daniel Cormier. Cormier has an MMA record of 22 wins, 3 losses and 1 no contest. Not only that, but he has a freestyle wrestling record of 40 wins and 6 losses. Cormier is the 2nd ever UFC fighter to hold 2 different titles in 2 different weight divisions, and is also the 1st ever fighter to defend both belts in both weight classes. Cormier now spends his time being a commentator for the UFC, but he holds one of the biggest UFC rivalries in history against John Jones. The types of fighters that Cormier has beat truly makes him a UFC Hall of Famer. People such as Dan Henderson, Alexander Gustafsson, Frank Mir, Anderson Silva and Stipe Miocic. With so many big wins under his belt and winning 2 different weight division championships, Daniel Cormier places 8th on my top 10 American UFC fighters of all time. My number 7 is Dominick Cruz. Cruz has an MMA record of 24 wins and 4 losses. He currently fights in the bantamweight class for the UFC and fights at the Alliance MMA gym. Cruz has been a champion of 3 different fighting companies such as the UFC, the WEC and Total Combat. Cruz is one of the 4 only people to ever get a win over Demetrius Johnson, who's considered by many to be the GOAT of MMA fighters. His biggest rivalry was against Uriah Faber, winning a total of 2 out of their 3 fights. He also coached the opposing team in the Ultimate Fighter Season 15. The 2 were meant to fight at the end of the season, but Cruz had to pull out due to a torn ACL. With such a high fighting IQ and the most wins in bantamweight history for the UFC and the WEC, I've got Dominick Cruz ranked at my number 7 on my list. At number 6 we have Randy Couture. Couture joined the UFC in May 1997 and competed at UFC 13 event where he won the UFC heavyweight tournament by winning 2 fights in 1 night. He has an MMA record of 19 wins and 11 losses and fought out Team Quest. Couture was a former US Army Sergeant before joining with the UFC and has won a total of 3 championship belts in 2 different weight divisions. Fighting names such as Chuck Liddell, Tito Ortiz, Vitor Belfort, Brock Lesnar and Mark Coleman. Not only was his biggest rivalry against Chuck Liddell, but he also coached the opposing team on the first ever season of The Ultimate Fighter. With all that said, and this is a controversial pick for me, the man had won a UFC bout at the age of 45 and is a UFC Hall of Famer, hence why I picked Randy Couture as my number 6. At number 5, I have Chuck Liddell. Better known as the Iceman, Chuck Liddell fought at light heavyweight and heavyweight across 3 different fighting companies. He has a professional MMA record of 21 wins and 9 losses. He also has a kickboxing record of 20 wins and 2 losses. Chuck Liddell truly was a fan favourite and one of the first UFC megastars. Liddell had his first ever pro MMA fight in the UFC and fought guys such as Vitor Belfort, Alistair Overeem, Rampage Jackson, Tito Ortiz and Randy Couture. The Iceman had more than 1 rivalry with other fighters that include Randy Couture, who he fought 3 times, Tito Ortiz, who he fought 3 times, but the only man to ever defeat Chuck Liddell in both fights is Quinton Rampage Jackson. This UFC legend and Hall of Famer has certainly earned the respect from other MMA fighters and fans from all across the globe, so for me, he takes the number 5 spot on my list. At number 4, we have Dan Henderson. This man has truly done it all, fighting at welterweight, middleweight, light heavyweight and heavyweight across 4 different companies such as the UFC, Pride, and Strikeforce, Dan Henderson truly sets the bar for all MMA fighters. He has a professional MMA record of 32 wins and 15 losses. In the King of Kings 1999 finale, he beat 3 men in one night to become the tournament winner. The most notorious wins he's ever had were over names like Renzo Gracie, Vitor Belfort, Wanderlei Silva, Rich Franklin, and who could forget the knockout win over Michael Bisping. Being able to contend and win a championship belt in every single fighting company that you've ever fought for makes Dan Henderson a true great, and he's earned himself the position of number 4 in my list of top 10 American fighters. At number 3, I have Matt Hughes. Now, if you're a fan of the channel, you already know that Hughes is one of my favourite fighters, and it's not hard to see why. He has a professional MMA record of 45 wins and 9 losses, and fought out of the Miletech fighting systems and Finney's Hit Squad. Hughes was the 2-time welterweight champion and the 8th inductee into the UFC Hall of Fame. With a very dominant wrestling style fighting, he is widely regarded as one of the best MMA fighters of all time. Hughes also has notable wins over fighters such as Royce Gracie, Matt Serra, Renzo Gracie, Frank Trigg, Carlos Newton, and BJ Penn. Hughes was also the first of the fighters to beat George St. Pierre. In 2017, Hughes was in a train collision which caused him to be comatized. He suffered a grade 3 head injury causing permanent damage. Hughes, being the man he is, managed to survive. And that, alongside with his legendary MMA career, is why I've put him in my number 3 spot on my list. At number 2, I have Demetrious Johnson. Johnson currently has a professional MMA record of 25 wins and 4 losses with 1 draw. He fights at the AMC Pancration in Washington. Widely regarded as an MMA GOAT and the best UFC bantamweight fighter of all time, Johnson has defended his UFC belt 11 times and defended his one championship belt twice. Johnson has fought fights like Brad Pickett, Dominic Cruz, Joseph Benavidez, Henry Cejudo, and Ray Borg. He holds the UFC record for the most flyweight wins, and at the age of 36 is still currently a champion with 1 championship. With such a dominant career and still with 3 or 4 more years left of fighting before he retires, Demetrious Johnson has proven even before he's retired that he's one of the best to ever do it. That's why he's landed a spot at number 2 on my top 10 American UFC fighter list. The number 1 on my list is Jon Jones. Now, you can say what you want about this guy as a person, but as a fighter, he is truly one of the greatest of all time. Jones has a professional MMA record of 27 wins, 1 loss and 1 no contest. At the age of 23, he became the youngest UFC champion ever, and has remained undefeated ever since, and even recently moving up to heavyweight and winning the UFC vacant belt. He's beaten legendary fighters such as Stephen Bonner, Rampage Jackson, Lyoto Machida, Rashad Evans, Vitor Belfort, Chael Sonnen, Daniel Cormier, and the list honestly goes on and on and on. He has sold over 5 million pay-per-view buys for the UFC, and his only loss ever being to a disqualification for elbows thrown in a fight, which at the time was a controversial topic. Jon Jones is without a doubt the best MMA fighter to ever live, the GOAT of the sport, and my number 1 pick for my top 10 American UFC fighters of all time.
And there you have it, there is my top 10 American UFC fighters of all time. I'm probably going to do Brazil next to keep the series going. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel or leave a comment below if you agree or disagree with anybody that I put in there, and if you think I should have added someone, let me know. I've also got a TikTok account as well, it's just On The Cage MMA, so if you go follow that as well, that would be fucking great. But that is it for this video, so I guess I'll see you on the next one.
They are not him, tell him fess up, I get checked up, hella carefree, nothing scares me, hella